Yo, it's Elliot with Yo Elliot. You got strength questions and I've got your answers.
Yo, Elliot.
Well, today we got a question from Daniel Cooley. He's a football player and he's got some questions about an SI joint injury. Check him out.
Yo Elliot, I've had a strain in my lower back for about a year now. It's in my SI joint. I've done a lot of treatment and therapy for it, but nothing really helps it very much. A lot of trainers and stuff think I'm just lying about it because nothing works. Really, it affects me when I ever have to do heavy weight, whenever I squat. The main thing is it bothers me when I'm changing direction at the very bottom of the squat. It gives me a lot of pain and feels like it's going to tear, I guess, you know. When I strained it and still have lost a lot of flexibility, I have to stretch and I have to pop my back a lot just to relieve pain and stuff like that. It even gives me trouble when I have to sit up straight for long periods of time, like in class and everything. I don't really know what to do about it, and I don't feel like it's ever really going to heal on its own because it's been like this for a while. A lot of people say, you know, give it rest, but I'm a football player and you know, it's just a year-round job, so I can't ever really give it any rest. I was just wondering if you have any advice, anything to give me to maybe help me out.
Well, Daniel, the very first thing I'd like to do is thank you for your video question, my man, and let's get right down to business. For those of you that don't understand how the SI joint works, essentially, as your vertebrae drops down into your hips from the top of your head or the base of your skull down into your hips, it turns into basically like a tailbone, which is what they would describe as the sacrum. And the sacrum is like the very last vertebra, if you will. And what happens is the iliac bones, the bones that make your hips that are right here, tie right into it. So you can imagine that if this is the vertebrae, you've got two sides of the hip that tie right into it, and then there's a bit of mobility in between the iliac bones and that sacrum, the very last vertebrae. There's very little movement that's associated with that particular joint. And the type of movement, or what they describe the movement as, is naturalization, which is basically where it's sitting in its instantaneous axis of rotation, which is very small, and counter-naturalization, which is where the tailbone sort of tips under a little bit and creates a bit of mobility between the sacrum and the iliac bones. That's why they call it the SI joint, sacrum iliac. So what happens is when people have injuries in that area, there's going to be one of two different types of problems, as there typically are with most joints. There's either too much mobility, very lax joints, or there's a lot of stiffness in it. And someone who has a lot of mobility in that joint, one of the things that I recommend that they do is to try to limit their range of motion and stiffen that joint. Some of the things that they would do for squatting is like take a wider base so that the two halves of the hip sort of pinch in and hold on to that iliac that sacrum much tighter. It sounds like you've got the opposite end of the spectrum, where you've got either too much tissue built up, too much nervous activation, and a lot of tightness in that joint. So that naturalization and counter-naturalization, where the mobility between the sacrum and the iliac is restricted. So what we've got to do for you is find out why, and we'll talk about that next, but what to do in order to relieve you of your pain. The answer on the surface is simple. You need to increase the mobility of that particular joint. How you're going to do it is, I'm going to give you a couple different ideas and exercises that you might want to consider, is to almost to force that naturalization and counter-naturalization by doing deep squats. Now, body weight squats and stretching squats. So what I'm talking about is, if you squat a lot of weight, and you said that when you go heavy, you have a lot of this problem, especially as you're moving up out of the descending part of your squat, you know, the eccentric and then into the concentric. what's happening is you're probably limiting the range of motion. I can imagine what's happening is you're squatting, you're getting to about parallel, or maybe even a little bit less than parallel. And what's happening is the muscles that surround that joint clench up and they're holding very tight as they normally would as you're moving into what would be the counter-naturalization portion of that movement. But before you actually go into the counter-naturalization, that true full range of motion that's allowed in that particular joint, you're freezing it. You're stopping right there because the weight's heavy. You can't really go much lower, and there's all types of psychological associations with going much deeper because there's fear, there's pain. So you stop, which is fine. That's normal. That's what most people do when they're squatting heavy weights. You don't put your ass to the ground unless you're an Olympic weightlifter. Generally speaking, unless you're going to do what I'm going to tell you to do, which is to start learning how to get your ass to the ground. Basically get your hamstrings to bump up against your calves. And I'm not telling you to do this when you're in football practice and when you've got 600 pounds on your back. What I'm saying is, at night before you go to bed or before you start practice or go to the weight room, you want to get down into some really deep squat positions and stretch this out here. What you're doing is, now this is that counter-naturalization that I just talked about. This is like the full range of motion that is typically allowed for that particular joint. So you want to get down into a deep squat like that, like what I'm doing here. Hold on to a bar or something that really like allows you to just sink it a little bit lower. Try to get your hamstrings on your calves and stretch down there. Now, what is typical with most injuries, especially joint injuries, is in the beginning, your body builds a sort of cast around that area, and it's a cast that's fabricated by the nervous system, and the cast is held in place by pain. So you may try to get into this particular movement, even granted that it's just body weight, you might like try to get into this stretch, and there's a lot of pain there. So your natural inclination is going to be to restrict that range of motion, not go into it. What I'm going to challenge you to do, and I'm not a doctor, I haven't even seen you move properly yet, I haven't assessed you, but anyone in this particular type of situation may want to consider pushing through the pain just a little bit. When I say push, I use that term lightly because it's more of a release. It's more of taking some deep breaths and relaxing and kind of coercing your body little by little over time to progressively release that hold on that joint and just settle in to this particular type of position here. And if you notice, I'm totally down between my thighs. And this is the position that human beings are designed to get into, through all of our developmental stages as a race on this planet. We would get into that position to shit, first of all. If you've ever seen children, my son, he still poops in his pamper because he's less than a year old, but he gets down and he does something weird like this. Or I remember my daughters doing that. They get down into a deep squat and they'll just shit in their pampers in that position. That's because they're still tied to their primal instinct. We, on the other hand, never get into that position because we sit on toilet bowls. Another thing is, if you recognize certain cultures where they still participate in most of their primal rituals, they'll get down to that position and they'll do their particular artwork, or they'll build things or build fires or even eat down in that position. Those cultures, if you study, don't really have the SI joint and back pain that we're dealing with. So those are just a couple things to consider. Now, with regard to the strength temple system that I've just been describing in several videos in the past, and I'll link a couple up here for you, that area is associated with a link between safety and security and sexuality. So there may be things that you want to consider outside of the gym that are challenging you. Did your parents break up and have a divorce at a very early age for you? So there's a sense of stability that has been removed from your life, and now there's a clenching up in that area. Are there money problems in your home? Any type of safety and security issues. And then how it's going to express itself beyond just the pain that you're dealing with down there is a loss of libido. And you're a 19-year-old dude, and I'm not sure if this is the case for you or not, but when you're in pain, especially in this particular area, and if you look at where the SI joint is in relation to your gonads and your sexual organs, it's very obvious that they're all in the same neurological loop. that same sacral plexus, like I talked about in video number 3 about a week ago, or 4. And that neurological loop is inhibited by the pain that you're experiencing in your SI joint. So those are just other things to consider when you look at the body holistically, or in that strength temple ideal that I described, and at least consider them. So that's it, my man. I appreciate your question, and I want to see you get rid of this pain. It's going to take some time. It's going to take some manual mobility if you know a really good massage therapist or any type of manual therapist to get in there and really break up some of the scar tissue or tightness that you may be dealing with. Take a look at some unresolved safety and security issues that you may be dealing with, and then movement therapy through the stretches that I showed you, namely deep squatting. You should get very, 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 very comfortable in that counter-naturalized hip position and open up the mobility in that joint. So thanks for your question, buddy. Keep sending me your video questions, folks, and I'll talk to you next time. Yo, Elliot.